Okay, we are live. Continue, Steven.
Well, I think if that show came out 2 years ago, there would have been a lot more hubbub about it. Because I feel like The Last of Us is what I noticed many people thinking that COVID was going to be. I don't know if any of you have seen any of the
Have you
show.
started watching it already?
Yeah.
I don't watch things in real time, so I'm not doing it.
I think there's only 3 episodes out so far, but they're
Yeah, I'm gonna
They're
wait
hefty.
until I can spool it all and watch it all in 1 week.
yeah. Well, when they're like hour-and-a-half episodes, you'll be there for a while.
I think I did all of Westworld, all 4 seasons, in a sequence. It was awesome.
You actually made it past the second season?
You made past the first like 3 episodes.
Season 4 was awesome. I think Westworld got better and better as time went on. So I realized it got really bad ratings. I think second season was garbage, but third and fourth seasons were excellent.
Yeah, I got about 2 or 3 episodes into the second season. I said, there's got to be something better for me to watch. My television watching time than this. This is absurd.
Yeah, I think
And
I
now
got to.
you can't even go. Like I'm telling you, it was a great show now, but you can't even go watch it now because they yanked it off of HBO Max.
Because it was so bad.
No, because
They just went ahead and took their loss.
That's not the reason. They sold it to the ad-driven networks.
Oh, they sold the rights to it too. That's interesting.
It's kind of a new trend in streaming now. They're taking other shows that have concluded, ripping them off the streaming platforms and reselling them to Tubi and all those other ad-supported streamers.
Huh.
That explains why stuff keeps moving over to those. And
We
Amazon's
have gone full circle to what we're now going back to advertising-driven mediums.
And
Before
Amazon's
too long,
the-
it'll be Game of Thrones season 8 on the middle of the day on Saturday. You know.
That's right.
See,
And manufacturing is all coming back to the United States.
You laugh,
quit.
but they did this.
I quit Game of Thrones before it was cool to quit Game of Thrones. I think it was.
Ultimate hipster.
When was it? Whatever episode end of this. I think it was end of season 2. I think, where like the lady gives birth to the smoke monster in like the ditch.
Are we talking about Game of Thrones or Lost?
Yeah, no, and the funny thing is, I know what you're talking
Both
about.
of those happened in that movie in that show. I think. Well, no.
Yeah.
And Lost.
That was
is
the
just,
second or third season. I don't remember.
Yeah, something like that. It was after the Red Wedding. No, I don't
that was
think.
before.
Yeah, I didn't even watch the Red Wedding. I just know
Yeah,
the memes
'cause-
about it.
Because Amazon did exactly that. They have a show, Bosch. It was a great show. They had 4 seasons. Everyone's digging it. Then, like, season 5 comes out. It's on Freevee, which is the property they bought, which
That's
is
right,
an
it's owned by
ad-supported.
Amazon.
What is
That's
Freevee?
Right, and they're moving their own like new seasons of stuff people like over to that.
Which I think is pretty obnoxious. I'm paying for those streaming services.
Right.
You're paying
Um,
for a premier service. So
I should get access to everything. No?
what's that?
I don't care if they
So what's telling
replay
me is that the ad services actually make them more money than the subscription services then,
Really?
which is interesting. Well, that's the only reason why they would do it is they make more money that way.
What were the numbers we heard on that, Misha? It was something like Amazon, something like a third of their operating profit comes from ads now.
Well, behind AWS,
Right.
advertising is their most profitable service. By the way, if things evolve in that direction, we could very well find ourselves here 10 years from now saying, we cracked the code on super profitable manufacturing. It just requires advertising.
You know, this kind of feels. I'm feeling like this is a topic we're going to have to go into at some point during the podcast today.
How do
I
we
don't think
sell
you're completely off
ads?
base.
How do we sell ads to engineers that want to build hardware?
You put the ads on their PCBs.
Well, we should ask supply.
Well,
Frame about
I
that.
actually
They build a
think
good business
it would
on that.
improve the engineering experience in ways we haven't thought about yet. Like the way that component manufacturers reach engineers now is still through people that show up in your office and bring you donuts, which is a really ineffective way of reaching people that are doing design, right?
You know, that's actually a good.
Advertising
is
would be
how-
much more effective.
It's actually how well, at least for me, and I think this might go for Steven too, because we talked about how do we find components, and it's basically like you're doing a Google search of a function that you want the component to do, and then it pops up in a search feed somewhere, either it's a PDF, or like the landing page for that part has like that keyword in it, or someone talked about it on some forum.
Well, Steven, you work at an OEM. Do you not have manufacturers reps coming to visit you?
We before COVID, yes. Since COVID, I haven't
I
seen
was
a
going to
single
say, you
one.
got to get on the circuit. You get free donuts.
This is actually really interesting because I kicked off a project about a month and a half ago, and I've done it with a handful of engineers through our Slack channel and some engineers that I've known from the past, where I sit down and I have 3 questions to ask them, and it's just a short interview about how do you get to your part, how do you get from I need a part to the one that gives you the warm and fuzzies, and what is the way you learn about your components. And what I'm really trying to do is find where engineers are different, where engineers are doing unique things, and then where everyone does the same thing. And so far, I don't have a massive sample set, but Google is basically everything. It's just I Google what I need, and then whatever shows up, I go down that rabbit hole. And none of them, no engineer I've talked to has said, when a rep comes in, I really listen to them and I hold their brochures and I research all of it. I've gotten none of that.
And yet there are employed in very large numbers by component makers. So obviously deliver some kind of economic value. But look, let's just put this into business model terms. What everybody said is what I use Google. They're very much using ad-supported mechanisms to go find components, right? So it all eventually all converges in advertising.
I wonder if I don't know. One thing you should check, Steven, on is company size for those engineers, because I bet you, when you get to a certain size, you have vendors that you're locked into what components that you can get. Like certain manufacturers, you're locked in, and getting on those lists is probably what the vacuum chip salesman is doing.
Well, and to be honest, it's not the perfect time for me to be asking this because we're on the tail end of chip shortage. Well, we're in a zone of chip shortages, and so almost everyone is just saying, "Oh, well, the first thing I do is I just see who has what,
Whatever's available.
Yeah, what is available?
Yeah, what's available," and so that kind of skews my data a bit. So we have to get past that first question and then go into, well, okay, assuming it's available, how do you find what you want?
And I think, it's been true for a long time. The reason why advertising is so profitable is attention is the most valuable asset anyone has out there, right? When it comes to like our capitalist society, right? There's a lot of products. How do you get someone's attention? And I think the reps serve a function, and I don't think that function really is helping you to pick the right part, whatever they say. The whole function they have is to remind you that they still exist as a business. They're somebody out there you should think about.
Or just prompt you that there's other options available, right?
Right. But I don't think that I don't think their value comes from getting you to actually use that part. But the question is, like, when you go searching for that part, yeah, they weren't helping you pick a part, but you're Googling stuff and you're seeing ads, you're ignoring those ads, you're going to look for this, but then their name pops up again and you go, oh yeah, I was talking to them last week. I have someone I know I can talk to over there, right? Maybe and ask a question, or I can reach out to the FAEs that they keep demanding I have a meeting with. Now I have a reason to talk to their FAE.
Phone call. You're not talking to the person that brought you donuts. You're talking to an engineer that actually knows the properties of that product, and all of a sudden, it feels like discovery, right? You're learning about a new product.
And I think that's where, if you think about advertising, back to Misha's question, right? What role does advertising serve, when you're an engineer trying to get something manufactured? I don't think advertising in and of itself serves you anything, right? You don't care. You don't want to look at an ad. What you want is good contextual information that's relevant. Now, the question is if everybody has good contextual information that's relevant, how do you prioritize one vendor over another? Well, we might call that advertising.
Well, you're just talking about, MTM. multi-touch marketing.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we are now, and like you have
Whereas
ADM.
as that person coming in and giving you donuts didn't actually sell you the part, but
Right.
seeded your brain so that in 3-4 weeks you're searching for a part, and you see analog circuits has a chip that might work for you, and your stomach goes, "Oh, I want a donut."
Right. Yeah, it's just
That is when you graduate to a steak dinner.
Pavlov's components.
I think actually we talked about this once, Steven.
Yeah, we have. Hey, the thing that's interesting is I think experience plays a massive role in it, because if you're fresh out of school, you're 21 and you're an eager engineer, you have you don't have the experience, you don't have all the problems that have bit you in the ass with things, so you may be more likely to listen to Donut Man. Whereas if you're a seasoned graybeard and you're at the end of your career, you already have the guys that you already trust, and you don't need to listen to anyone else, right? I think that actually that comes into play quite a bit.
So this is completely off topic from what we wanted to talk about, but I'm curious now. Have you guys tried Chat GPT for component discovery? Like, have you? Because I've been experimenting with.
Oh yeah, we did it live on the podcast.
Same. Oh, did you? Okay, so how did it go?
Terrible. It made up stuff.
It hallucinated.
Yeah, that's actually a good term for it. It's really good though about. It is not good about making nonfiction stuff. Like actually coming up with facts and stuff is terrible at. But if you make up a component and ask it to give you specs for this made up component, it works really well.
So if we wanted to make a play about component sourcing, ChatGPT could plausibly write a script for us.
So, Misha, you should listen to the Star Wars podcast we did last month. I made my thing for that was I had ChatGPT write a Star Wars screenplay and had everyone act it out on the podcast.
That's awesome.
It was 4 acts.
Yeah,
like
4 acts.
It had an arc and everything.
That's
Wow.
fantastic.
Yeah.
One of the things that speaking of ChatGPT, one of the use cases it turns out is being absolutely amazing at is converting written text or whatever into correct idiomatic text. So imagine you have somebody who's not necessarily a native speaker of, like, say, English, and they're communicating, and you can understand you exactly what they're saying, but all the idioms are wrong. The sequences of words are wrong. So you can say, hey, restate this in idiomatic English, right? Or idiomatic American English. And it will write it back, and you're like, holy cow, that is perfect.
That's really cool.
Right? And it's really good at things like that. Like if you say, like, I want this text in this style. So like you guys were like, hey, I want you to do a movie, a plot, in the style of Star Wars or whatever. It knows how to recreate the effect of being something else.
Yeah.
It's really good at that.
It's really good at like if it's coming up with structures. It's for some reason it's really good at that.
In terms of storytelling, it is abysmal at motive and intent. It just does not get humans in that sense.
Because it would be like one character would be like really worried about something, and then like another character will just say something, be like, but it's okay because we're blank, and then the other character goes, oh yeah, you're right. Like there's no conflict or anything.
A character will abandon their convictions in one sentence.
One sentence.
They will present them, somebody refutes them, and then it flips.
Yeah, and that's
so it's definitely not going to replace engineers, because engineers never abandon their convictions, but it might replace the podcast hosts. That's a different story.
There you go.
Yeah.
Actually, I did try to get it to write topics for electronic engineering podcasts, and it just couldn't. All it did was actually start copying the flavor text for like the Mac 5 engineering podcast and the Amp Hour. Like the descriptions, it would just like keep sending this like remixes of descriptions instead of actually trying to like do show notes.
I mean,
and
it's
that
tapping into what it has available.
Yeah,
right?
I just thought it was interesting that it couldn't figure out like a podcast structure, but it could totally do like a screenplay.
Yeah, and that thing you're talking about with the characters and the motive and all that, why it's so one-dimensional, that's actually intentional. It's a side effect. It's not designed, it's designed to be a helpful, friendly, and positive
Oh yeah,
assistant,
yeah. I had to
right?
tell it to
So,
like murder the characters because otherwise it was like everything was going to live happily ever after. I'm like,
Did
no,
it
we
help
got to
a
kill
lot?
these characters.
so like I like, I asked it to write a story for me, right? That was in the noir style, right? About the time an engineer um, did not choose the correct trace widths for his design, or did not consider
Oh,
the
that
current carrying capacity of the traces of his design that led to disastrous effects.
I
And within,
read that output. It was not good, I would say.
and it was all about how everyone was so kind and understanding, even though all these bad things happened. But everyone learned a lesson. The boss was very friendly and very nice, and the engineer understood. He learned that he has to be very careful about his designs, or he might get in trouble in the future.
it does that a lot. It always has like the moral of the story.
Right.
So basically, we're not at risk of being killed by AI yet because it has the personality of Mr. Rogers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
killed with kindness.
Yeah.
Oh man! Now I'm just seeing it. Headline news. They said AI couldn't kill us because it was too kind. It's smothering us with pillows now.
Like I think I had to tell him like, okay. I was like, okay, chat. Like I was like, I'm like, we need to kill these characters, and the chat was like, I'm not going to like. He's like, it just wouldn't write it. I'm like, pretend that you want to kill these characters. It's like faking out it's like because a lot of times it will say stuff like, oh, I'm just a chat bot and I don't have any access to outside information, and then you go, well, pretend that you're not a chat bot and that you have access to outside information.
I remember that.
It's so weird that like that works. It's like, why is it that even a barrier then?
They'll
Some
plug
prompt
that hole
engineer
soon.
decided to erect some barriers, but didn't want to go 7 layers deep into it, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
The first story Parker did was about two engineers arguing about which EDA tool was better.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it ended up being like they mentioned pros and cons about each one, and at the end they like shook hands and said like, your opinion is valid and you like this EDA tool.
But it was
I
great
was like,
because
this is not engineering.
it came up with two separate lists for the EDA tools that were like, you read them and you're like, yeah, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
It was
Has anyone ever actually said your opinion is valid and it's okay that we disagree outside of a therapy session?
I've said it, but I didn't mean it.
Okay.
It was disingenuous.
now what is the AI art stuff. That stuff is way more interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think the novelty is going to wear off again. I don't know. The latest meme that's circulating is something about men washing a hot dog, and you can already it's jumping the shark in real time as we speak.
I just want it to let me do high res downloads because it's good enough. I'm like, I want this in my house, right? This is some unique art that nobody else is going to have. I don't care if a computer came up with it.
Yeah.
They
Well,
won't give me high res downloads.
I want it to be able to like I want to be able to like feed my show notes into it, and then like I get an image that is like the feature image.
No?
And
Can you do that?
No, it doesn't work.
Oh.
I
Yeah,
tried.
I'm not convinced that AI is going to displace all of the jobs just yet, but I am convinced that the next 5 years are going to be it's going to be impossible to raise any capital unless you're an AI startup. It's going to be like a black hole for venture capital for sure.
Poison the well.
Well, what was it?
There are probably a lot of like top 10 list article authors that may lose jobs over this, but I'm not sure that's a huge detriment to society.
I would say anything that is just SEO is going to go away.
Right.
I mean, Google's already basically tuning their algorithm to get rid of anything that's SEO like.
Yeah, my wife was mentioning that she works in marketing, and she was saying that Google's already adjusting how things are just because SEO doesn't matter as much anymore. It's way too easy to crank out stuff, and I think the argument is we're not going to have AI replace us. We're going to have new jobs where people learn how to wrangle AI. What it kind of boils down to.
How to sprinkle the right ingredients into the chat box window.
You'll have input experts and then people who clean up the export.
But automated trace layout still doesn't work. Is that right?
Yeah, so far, no.
That's amazing to me. I mean, they can make.
But that's like the traveling salesman problem on steroids, right?
Yeah, the big
although
problem.
I think the push routing is getting pretty good, right?
Push routing is really good. Really, the problem is if you can define every trace of what it is and what signals are on it, then yeah, an auto router can actually probably do a really good job.
But okay, the whole point of that, if you have already defined everything, you've already done the work.
Yeah.
Like you're done at that point.
Yeah, you've put in the hours already. You know,
Yeah.
you haven't saved anything.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess if you had an EDA tool that you can actually specify that on the parts, then you could save a lot of time that way. So like instead of having to define the parts on your schematic or the signals on your schematic, you could define it in the actual like component. So when you reuse it later down the road, all that work's already done.
You know, it's funny. Altium actually did start making some headway. That was one of the things they announced because we were doing the Altium Live event with them last year, which is weird, a live event where it's COVID and almost everybody's not there. It was like the weird virtual room thing, but that was one of the things they were announcing as one of the features they were planning to roll out this year, is where you have a component library and you manage all of that, the functions and everything, and you're able to create variants of chips and stuff, and they would inherit the functions. And then in theory that you could combine those together to create this sort of modular thing that you could plug in. But it did seem to be focused around, you know, clearly understanding the attributes in the function of every pin in a particular chip and how they would relate to nets and what the requirements were to connect to them and so forth. It still seems, you know, it's one of those things, again, it's a great building block, but it's still a lot of work today, right? And how do you get past that, right? Shouldn't just the manufacturers give us that information with their components for all the major EDA tools?
I had some interesting talks with some people over at DigiKey about gathering information from manufacturers, and it's basically, to boil it all down, they just said getting information from component manufacturers is a nightmare, and getting accurate information is a double nightmare from them. So yeah, I think in like this perfect world, that would be amazing if we could get electrical attributes in a digital format right from our manufacturer. But yeah.
Well, I mean, at this point, we've got every component manufacturer designs their components in CAD. Yet there are at least three companies I know of that you can go to buy CAD models of components that don't come from the manufacturer. But like, why can't the manufacturers just share those? You figure that would make it easier for everybody to implement their components in their products, but
I think it's CYA. If you use their 3D model and your device doesn't work or doesn't fit in your prototype, then you blame it on them, right?
Yeah.
So I think they give you the bare minimum amount of information for you to execute on.
And
well, I mean, there you're hitting on that. Oh, sorry, interrupt there, Parker.
Oh, and depending on what kind of like manufacturing processes, like the physical layout can slightly be changed and stuff to make stuff better. Like, let's say variation from like a manufacturer's defaults.
Yeah, but you're hitting on why we can't have nice things. Because every time you try to do something for somebody, and if it doesn't work out perfectly, they get mad at you.
Yeah. 100%. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just reality.
Right.
We should start this podcast.
Yeah, we probably should eventually, right?
I feel like we started.
Yeah.
The good thing is now the good thing now, since we're all on YouTube, is the pre-show, which is what we just concluded, is also
30 minutes.
is recorded now. It used to be like we would just throw away like an hour of Steve and I just talking.
Oh, I thought this was the podcast we were just going to talk about.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's when I
That was the Macrofab engineer.
I wish. I should have clicked this button like 30 minutes ago.
Oh, now we're recording.
Now we're recording. So we have like two
I've already
states of
used all my
recording.
best material.
What was that, Misha?
I've already used all my best material. I'm spent.
I'm sure you can come up with some more stuff. All right, Steven.
I'm perfect.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm interrupting the intro.
Oh, no. I was actually going to ask Steven. Whatever. Welcome to the Macrofab Engineering Podcast, a weekly show about all things engineering, DIY projects, manufacturing, industry news, and digital manufacturing and marketing. Wait, it says digital marketing. Who wrote that down?
That was probably a
I do
mistake. That's supposed to say digital manufacturing.
Digital manufacturing?
We're gonna blame ChatGPT for that for sure.
Yeah.
Our pre-roll infected the intro.
Yeah. So we are your hosts, electrical engineers Parker Dillman,
And Stephen Craig.
and this is episode 364. And you already heard the voices of Misha and Chris, who are, I think Misha's the CEO of Macrofab,
Still to this day.
still to this
yes.
day, and Chris is the other co-founder and CPO of Macrofab.
That seems correct.
Man, Chris Church was on the podcast, I want to say it was like February 2020, to talk about the end of electronics manufacturing as we know it. I think
You
we're still
predicted
building
that.
stuff, though.
You predicted that?
Did I actually predict the end of it? Oh, you said as we know it.
As we
Okay,
know
yeah,
it.
we're at the beginning of the end of as we know it.
Yes.
Ah,
3 years
we make
later.
a lot of claims on this podcast. We can't necessarily say that all of them are true.
The moment that someone starts live fact-checking our podcasts is the moment I'll pull my hair out.
The wheels are coming off.
Yeah. And then Misha was last on the podcast, man, back in 2018, 5 years ago.
can't be 5 years, is it really?
Yeah, we talked about supply chain securities and like,
We did. That was a fun topic. I appreciate you
And-
letting me come back.
yeah, and I just remember, I actually remember that podcast vividly because Steven thought everything that you were saying, Misha, was a conspiracy theory, and I'm like, no, all this stuff has happened, Steven.
I think the one word that comes to mind with that was vector. I don't think I've heard the word vector more than
When you're
On
in the
that
cybersecurity world, it's all about vectors, which means you got to turn around and see what's coming at you.
So do you, I don't have actually, funny enough, I don't have anything written down of like what y'all do. So Misha, what's the day in life as CEO of Macrofab?
Oh my God, what a complicated question. I think every CEO has a pretty crazy day in general because, I don't know, a lot of people have a lot of stuff on their schedules, but it's random. There's things that have to get done every quarter. There are things that have to get done every month. But that's interlaced with just explosions of unexpected events happening all over the place. So I would say, I don't know, 50% of what I do is unscheduled and it's just whatever comes at us. So I think that's probably the most interesting part about the job is that it's my job to think on a 3 to 5 year scale. And part of what I do is I help people zoom out once in a while and say, hey, I know you're doing something that impacts tomorrow, but we got to think about long-term things once in a blue moon. But I also get to pivot once in a while and just deal with literally just the latest disaster of the day, which happens in startups all the time. It's fun. I don't know if that answers your question,
It was more rhetorical, if anything.
but but depending on who you ask, for a lot of startup CEOs, I think the cliche is like, look, your job is to never let the company run out of money. So at least in that sense, I feel like I've done something because we just raised a large round of capital. So we're not running out of money anytime soon.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Fundraising is a sadomasochistic process that I hate while I'm doing it, but I miss as soon as it's done. So it's we're at the very, very tail end of that, but it's a fun process. It's like dating and getting rejected hundreds of times over and over again until finally somebody says yes.
is there an app for that?
There's several apps for that, and they're all very unfulfilling.
So Chris, I'm gonna ask the same kind of question: is what's the day in life like as CPO, Chief Product Officer of Macrofab? I guess also co-founder, because everyone on the podcast, I'm also the other co-founder, but everyone knows, like, what, everyone's listened to me talk for like 300 something plus hours of podcasts. So
there's actually a lot of overlap, right? I mean, with what Misha just said. So if you think about the title, what I do, ostensibly what I do is I lead our product and technology teams to deliver success to our customers. But the reality is everything we do as a business is part of our product. So a big chunk of what I'm having to do on any given day, what I want to be doing is strategy, right? Thinking about where we're going, how we're going to get there, what is it going to take to get there. But in reality, most of the time, I'm interacting with everybody who's in the process of delivering for the customer, whether it's in logistics or manufacturing or somewhere else, listening to what's going on, and then adjusting that strategy and that roadmap and everything that we're doing kind of in real time, and helping them work through how to get back to that customer and help that customer be successful. So there's just, I would say it's like Misha, there's a lot of fires, but it's a little different in the sense that I'm not being tasked to solve them so much as to prevent them from happening again in the future.
Or trying to see the fires before they even become a thing.
Yeah, you are expected to be a little bit psychic, but the reality is in engineering, right? All systems are going to break down. Entropy is going to happen, right? There are going to be issues, and you can observe signs long before they really happen. And the trick is to know when you need to react to them and when you should just ignore them, because they're not going to have an impact on anything right now.
But in a lot of ways, the jobs that Chris and I do actually overlap quite a bit, and they're unique in some ways. This is not the job of everybody in the business, but there is at least two people who are tasked with figuring out what this thing we're building really is, right? Like, what is Macrofab and what can it turn into over time? How to actually make it grow and successful? If we were to envision this a very large company in the future, how do we actually get it there? There's a lot of overlap between Chris and I and trying to figure out what that looks like. So a good portion of our time is spent on that to make sure that whatever we're working through now folds into that future version of that, which is not dissimilar than where you guys started, right? I wasn't there at the beginning, right? So at the beginning, it was the two of you guys, and I'm sure there were a lot of those conversations. I actually find the whole process fascinating of two people deciding they're going to go build a company together, figuring out what that might look like in the future, and it's almost never the exact picture of that, right? It's fuzzy and it mutates over time. And Parker, you and I have talked a lot about, your view of how things were going to work out and how that's different as time goes on. It's a moving target, right? It's a combined product of a lot of people's imaginations in a lot of ways. So I think that part of the job is by far my favorite. Right? That's a lot of fun.
I like that sentence, the product of many imaginations. Actually, I think we probably just found a podcast title. But yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it. And yeah, how it morphs and mutates over time.
We have a board member, and he's from the electronics distribution industry. And like the favorite things he said to me is like, there was one question I asked him, I forget what it was. It wasn't terribly important, but he usually gives us, tremendous knowledge and a lot of advice. But that time he was like, I thought you guys are going to go out of business a long time ago, so I'm not qualified to answer this question. If you're asking me what you're going to do in the future, I didn't think any of this stuff was going to work. So your guess is probably better than my opinion.
Hey, the podcast even started that way. Like when Steve and I started it, we're like, there's no way they're going to let us do more than like 10 episodes.
10 was pushing it.
Yeah, 10 was pushing it, especially at the first couple ones.
Yeah, I mean, starting with a blank canvas is fascinating, I think, right?
Yeah.
But I think, Misha, you bring up a real good point here. Early on, and Parker will remember this, early on, everything was a product of two people's imagination, right? We had to own every outcome, we had to do all that, and we had to be constantly extremely opinionated. As the company grows and gets more mature and we have more customers, in the leadership roles, we get less about, saying what the future is, predicting it, and more about directing those streams, if you would, so that they align. And so all the different ideas coming from all the different people, helping them figure out which ones are the right ones to continue advancing, which ones we need to pull back on for a little while and watch for a little while. That's I think one of the most interesting changes about it. Our own personal opinions matter less. It matters more that we're able to focus what everyone else is already talking about and help them pick the signal out of the noise in that.
Not the least of which are things that our customers are willing to pay for, right? Because the number of companies out there where the founders thought the problem was big and very important and worth solving, that really didn't find an adequate number of people willing to agree with them enough to actually spend some of their own money on solving that problem. That's probably the essence of any company getting born, right? I mean, there are a lot of people out there who would love to build a business, but it meets reality of customers not really necessarily caring, right?
Well, at the end of the day, you have to create something that somebody wants. You have to scratch an itch inside.
That's right. I mean, I think part of it is even in the introduction that Parker did. I don't know if that's a standard thing you guys say. Do you always mention digital manufacturing in your introduction?
For each episode, the last word, we always change it to reference something in that episode.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is because you guys didn't really start out as a digital manufacturing company. Wasn't the original discussion was all about tabletop pick and place machines?
The original was to do software-defined hardware. That was the original idea.
That was the original actual macrofab idea.
Yeah.
But we did talk about a desktop factory.
Yes.
Before we decided to start macrofab and killed that.
Yeah. Well, because there was actually at the time a couple of other companies that were doing that, and we saw that they were doing it, and we're like, well, there's already like 3 or 4 people doing that, so not that.
Well, that's the reason I brought up digital manufacturing, because that is a thing. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a massive thing yet, right? So I think it shows promise. But the tabletop factory, right? Tempo did that for a while. Tempo ended up moving out of being a tabletop factory and really moved closer to what we're talking about as digital manufacturing. But I'm still fascinated to learn that there's still companies trying to build tabletop pick and place machines, right? So I don't know. I think the way that this market has evolved, and it's still very early, I think, is pretty interesting. I mean, you guys were there and paying attention to it a lot more than I was, but it sure seemed like in the early days of it, there was this feeling like additive manufacturing is coming in the future. We're going to be printing, jet engine parts in our garages using our 3D printers. And there were a lot of companies started with that premise, and that was called digital manufacturing, even though none of that turned out to be true, right? Like, we're not printing anything for jet engines in our houses, right? That's not a thing.
I think what you talked about earlier, which is when you start a business, you're trying to solve a problem and sell that solution to someone. And so a lot of engineers are like, I need to get prototypes faster. So the fastest way for me to do that is to build a machine that puts these boards together. I'm going to sell this to other people times 100, right?
I think it's that, but I think it's also just the premise of 3D printing, right? If you start with technology but not the problem, then you got to back it into a business model. I think distributed factories that live in people's houses becomes one of the ideas you come up with, which is why, you know, the maker movement was massive, and there were a number of companies out there. Shapeways was one of them, right? Where you were going to have these distributed factories that, I mean, there's a lot of venture capital that went into those models. None of that really worked necessarily, right? All those companies pivoted to something else, right? Even though I think in people's imagination it's still kind of alive and well. Like, I mean, Chris turned me on to, what's that show you had me watch on? It was a sci-fi thing with robots in it. I know that narrows it down.
Yeah, there's
Sci-fi thing with robots.
The Expanse.
No,
Was-
not The Expanse.
was it a show or
It was
Carbon
a
Black?
show. No, the most recent one. It
Is
just concluded on Prime, right? So it's why am I
very famous
blanking on the
one.
name of it?
I know. I'm suddenly.
It's on Prime?
The Peripheral. The Peripheral.
Peripheral. That's right. So in the Peripheral, there are those, you know,
by the way, that's a
3D
really cool
printing
name.
bureaus in, you know, in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina, printing out electronics parts, right? So there's still people living that dream, right? Like that's like it looked like a Kinko's shop, right?
Well, to be fair, it's William Gibson. He kind of invented the dream. So.
Is in that
Was
show
the 3D printing thing in the book as well?
Yeah.
in that show don't they 3D print like pharmaceuticals? Is that a different show?
No, they don't 3D print pharmaceuticals. They 3D print like they can print like electronics and stuff
Electronics,
integrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must be thinking of another
But-
show.
But I think Misha, I think what you're hitting on there is just, you know, this is innovation in general, right? A lot of people see a problem, right? And then they all attack it from different ways. And I think the question here, and this is, you know, how we come up with all these, you know, all the best stuff we have comes from a lot of different people trying different solutions to a, you know, this kind of general problem. I think the trick is for a lot of these companies to recognize, they have the ability to not be connected to their solution and to be more connected to the problem, right? To say, hey, this solution may not actually be, it may be working to some degree, but it's not really the solution to this problem, and able to keep pivoting and refocusing and dialing in that solution until they get something that's really has mass market appeal.
So I want to switch gears because I just glanced at chat, and Caesar in chat asks, "How did the name Macrofab come about?" And the funny thing is, I don't even recall anymore.
I do.
Okay, I think you just said the name to me. I'm like, that sounds good.
No, it's like everything else. You take a rule-based approach. It has to be two words. They have to be smashed together because it will stick in someone's head better that way. And the two capitalizations will help it stand out. It must not exist anywhere in Google in anything even remotely related to what you're looking for. And it has to have the essence of the product you're doing, but not explicitly the product.
That's funny because we actually went through this process with our first company when we named Alert Logic, but Chris hadn't exactly articulated the algorithm yet. Like he could clearly write the band name generator now quite easily. He's got the recipe.
Startup
Sure.
generator name.
But that's exactly how we came up with Alert Logic. It's two words smashed together that loosely relate to the function of the company. So we did figure out all those rules that, you know, the day we selected that name, but that was more of a random walk. I think there were people like throwing out random things, and I can distinctly remember Chris having some kind of a rule-based approach to choosing a name. So yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, and I think we were writing in your old Tacoma, and Chris was just like, "So how about the name Macrofab?" And I'm like, "That sounds good," and that was it. That's all that. There's not some big like. It's not like on the Silicon Valley show where like they always have these crazy stories of how stuff comes about. It's like, no, there was no crazy story here.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's
it's that
changed
simple, right?
degree. but the name has fit every change we've implemented quite well, which begs the question, like, what do we do now? Does that remotely resemble what you guys thought we're going to do when you launched the business?
Oh man.
No, I don't think so.
No. When we did the first pivot, it made more sense. Actually, the name made more sense after the first pivot, which was to actually like build stuff. Like because when we first came up with like to do software defined hardware, and so we were designing hardware that you could like a breadboard that would like connect itself together, and we just couldn't hit the price point for that product, and so and basically it was like we're going to start there and then eventually build the whole tool chain right to build hardware, but start at like the prototype level, and then we flipped that around and decided to go from the opposite end, which was build manufacturing that can be software defined in essence, which is you know upload the platform and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of
And
times.
then that's gelled since then, right? I mean, it's morphed and evolved, but that's generally the structure.
The whole I didn't even think like a marketplace structure was ever going to be the thing.
No, we didn't know that, and that was
No.
to
I
be
think
fair.
we borrowed that liberally from Xometry, right?
Yeah, and to be fair, we wouldn't have done it if it hadn't have been an existential thing for us. We needed to build a bigger factory to keep up with the demand we had, and we couldn't get anyone to give us money to build a bigger factory, so we had to come up with a way to scale and grow. And then that's when we're like, well, what if we use other people's capacity? Because it wasn't a marketplace at first, right? It was just we were going to use other people's capacity.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
true.
when we were struggling with making that work and scale, that's when we started borrowing from Xometry and saying, well, they're making this whole marketplace thing work. You know, maybe we can do that too, right? We can learn from what they're doing, and maybe instead of trying to schedule capacity, we just let people come and take it, right? And we let people tell us that they're ready for work.
Yeah, because that was actually the first implementation was us. We were trying to schedule out other people's facilities, and that was a nightmare.
I, I remember like we also had to have all of our tracking stuff working. I remember going
And
down to a
at
factory in
other
Mexico.
factories too. Steven, I
Yeah,
think, actually implemented some of that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember
yeah.
if you were there with me, Stephen, when we went to the first factory in Mexico and started screwing on barcode scanners onto their machines.
Yep.
Oh, I
Yep.
did. That
Like,
actually
I was
happened.
there.
This is news to me.
yeah, that was.
I remember talking to the people down there at the factory and trying to come up with a solution on how we were going to do it, and they just took a drill and started drilling holes in the side of their machine to
Didn't
bolt.
let you do that? That's amazing to me.
No, they didn't let me do it. They did it themselves, but I wasn't assuming that was going to be the solution that they were okay with, but they seemed to be fine with mounting brackets to the side of their machine by just drilling holes in them.
It's crazy what you can actually accomplish when you just really have full confidence and you're willing to throw your whole self at it, and you'll find that people are willing to do all kinds of things to succeed, right? And you gotta find something that's repeatable and valuable for everybody in there, right?
So I think that process is still ongoing because there's been a non-trivial amount of money that went into trying to build a new business model for manufacturing. And in some cases, like Parker said, you got to find a problem that somebody has and compelling enough to actually solve. But then the next stage of that problem is that problem that is worth solving big enough for people to pay enough money for it to actually sustain a business, multiple companies. And this has been interesting to watch as well. There's been a number of companies where the obvious thing that they're working on is accelerating prototype development. And while that's a problem, it doesn't look like that's a big enough problem for multiple businesses to solve it as the only problem they're focused on. What's really working, right? I think Xometry is, is really doing a phenomenal job, right? Those guys went public, I think, last year. So clearly providing access to a lot of manufacturing capacity out there. And just the notion that you can get access to a lot of different manufacturing processes, and they can take it through various stages of scale. Now, it may get too expensive at some point, so they don't do a lot of high volume production, but still, it's a high scale operation. Um, it looks like the prototype only models really haven't scaled nearly as far. Like Tempo is still very much low volume focused, and they've gone public, but very different go public process than Xometry, right? Xometry is, I think at this point Xometry is going to do maybe what $400 million this year. That is a fast scaling business. We haven't seen anything like that with anybody building prototypes per se, right? So I think people are still figuring out what this digital manufacturing thing is and why somebody should care, and what big problems are worth solving, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of on the prototyping side, because that's actually where we kind of went with, right? We were batching. It wasn't really about speed though. It was more about low cost prototypes. We did have a like 5-day turn eventually, but the 5-day turn was really like bootstrap style. Like we would get, oh man, I remember this turned into like Macrofab 8 years ago, the podcast, right? We had a piece of glass that was like a window, and we put up masking tape, and so we basically made a spreadsheet on glass so we could like keep track of stuff. and when that got so overwhelming to maintain, Steven, I don't know if we were still using it when you joined.
That was right before I came on.
Yeah. And it got to the point where we had enough orders where that you couldn't maintain it that way, and then we finally built it into the platform, or I actually gotta say Chris built it into the platform, and that page is still there today. That functionality is still there.
Haven't we actually taken that exact instance? Because there have been several iterations of that in the platform on our back end. And I remember there was one that was exactly that, the thing that was on that window.
That was the first
And
iteration, yeah.
right. And it still worked, but I think we might have actually finally just deleted it from the code base recently.
Oh no.
Because it's like we've got 5 other ways to.
Yeah. It was not a very good way of doing it either. It was just like a way the checklist and what the due dates were, and like,
Right.
and but yeah. So for what spurred this is the 5-day. It was a 5-day order would come in, and then I would go on Mauser and DigiKey and order parts right then, and order boards right then, and then it would show up like a day and a half later, and then Steven and I would be out on the floor building boards. These 5-day
it was
orders.
all hands on deck.
Yeah, it was when we actually got a 5-day order in. That was like all hands on deck to build them.
And Misha's always trying to tell me to bring back the 5-day thing, and I keep looking back at that, going, "I never want to do that again."
Yeah, because it was. Yeah, it was the 5-day. It was a lot of fun.
People want 5-day service. It's coming back someday.
It was insane. It was just because at the time we didn't really have the integration with the machines at the time that we have now, and with like inventory at the time wasn't a thing that we had in the platform, and so you'd have to maintain all that yourselves. You had to basically do everything. Because really at the time the only thing the platform did was manage the BOM and the Gerbers for the customer. And
the integration into the machines at that time was us running onto the floor being like, we need to get this done, we're shoving it into production.
Yeah. And whereas nowadays it would be, barring supply chain problems, I think we could probably do a 5-day. I'm not going to say easily, but it would be
I
not
do
a
agree
stretch.
right now is not the time to launch something like that, just because component
It's a
market is
supply
so
chain problem of
crazy
components,
right now.
yeah.
But I do think at some point it'll probably make sense. By the way, that's the thing. I've been here 4.5 years. I understand why an engineer would want their design to be prototype faster. Why it has to be as cheap as humanly possible, I don't fully understand yet. Because I
That's
think there's just so many other considerations to where like price would not be the top of my list. Like I personally would not send my design to China. I just wouldn't do it. But people do, right? Like for a lot of people, they will absolutely trade out, 20% cost down to Asia. And I'm not sure I understand that fully. That still is a great mystery to me. And I've asked people, they can't always explain it or verbalize it.
I think the badge of honor of on time and under budget, if you're doing engineering project lead, that I mean, I think that explains a good bit of it. So, and a lot of times, I think engineers, myself included, at times have been bad at projecting costs of what a project's going to be. So a lot of times, you kick off a project and you set a budget for it, and now you actually have to stick to that budget, and it's difficult. So finding fast and cheap is attractive. As you grow in experience, you learn how to appropriately budget at the beginning. But I've certainly run into that.
But in business terms, your time as an engineer,
yeah,
matters a lot. Like the people are truly the expensive part of the operation. The actual circuit boards themselves are not in most cases, right? So like getting people to collaborate and getting people to make faster decisions, all of that has a lot more impact on ultimate iteratability of any product, right? I mean, you're trying to iterate through multiple designs to get to a better and better product so you can actually launch it, sell it to somebody, make it, put it in somebody's hands. I'm not sure if the unit price of that early stage circuit assembly matters that much in the grand scheme of things.
it's interesting.
depends on how granular you get with it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about where that came from, and it's probably from the previous company that when I went to go work with Church at. Well, he hired me, I guess. There, I didn't go work for him; he hired me. It was Dynamic Perception, which was a open source hardware company, I guess software too, hardware and software company, and that was actually what's kind of spurred Macrofab. Was like building electronics like really sucked for that company, because we had to third party it out, and we wanted to build it in the United States, and to get any kind of volume that we were selling, we'd have to buy like 2-3 years worth of product on the shelf, and it would be open source. So the moment that it hit market, a month later, a competitor had completely cloned it, and it's just building them in overseas at that point. And it's like, well, how do we compete with that? How do we enable? Well, it's more like not us competing. Is like, how did we enable other small companies to compete with that model? And that was actually what kind of spurred this idea of mixed jobs and lowering the NRE costs and that kind of stuff. And then what's really interesting, what happened was we were getting customers that didn't believe the cost could be that low, and we would lose business because of that we were too cheap. I remember
For the dynamic perception product, people didn't believe it could be as low as it was.
Yeah, when
No, for Macrofab.
For Macrofab. Yeah. Chris, when you told me that, I can't remember when you told me that. I just couldn't believe it. That that was a concern people had.
Yeah, I mean, and I can see it, right? You got to have a certain amount of credibility. You're a new company, no one's ever heard of you. Me doing this has been expensive forever, and then you come in here and you're going to do it for 1/10 of the price of someone else. Yeah, I'm gonna let someone else take that risk. I realize I'm only out 1/10 of the money, but it's not credible, right? And then it became credible, right? People figured it out. People were saying like, this is working. I am, having a great experience. And then you have the opposite problem where that sets the new bar of expectation for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And and that did become a challenge for us for a while, right, Parker? We had a lot of people who wanted really cheap prototypes and needed a lot of help getting those prototypes to be manufacturable. And it was kind of like, well, the cheap thing was you got what you put in. And I understand you wanted us to catch all of these issues, right? But you didn't pay for that, right? And that was how we made that service cheap for you.
Yeah, it was a lot of automation that no one was looking at it because there wasn't you weren't paying for someone to look at it, right?
Right. Right.
And that was really hard for people to understand. And what we kind of learned, I guess, was it became more important to make sure that stuff was built right versus being built cheap
Mhm.
or inexpensive, I guess. Which that kind of changed when we went to more of a distributed manufacturing model and the marketplace. That kind of all happened at the same time there.
Yeah. That's because everyone feels bad in the process. The factory feels bad. Your team feels bad. There's no one involved when someone's product comes out and it doesn't work and there was a mistake, there was an issue somewhere in it. Everyone involved in that does really actually feel bad about it. I think most people don't realize that people take it very personally. And you say, well, we could have prevented that, and you didn't do the things you could do to prevent that. Then everyone's like, man, I don't want to be a part of this, right? So you have to kind of look and say, maybe we need to retune that. Maybe the cheap thing isn't going to keep everyone engaged. And what we need to do is focus on the right thing, and focus on the delivery model that really works.
Yeah.
And is going to.
I think the big impact, like the biggest thing that sticks in my mind was we had someone place an order, and then we loaded on the machine, and it was clearly, because this is the time that the customers did all the rotations themselves, right? And it was clearly the customer didn't do the rotation, so if we put them on the board how they specified, the parts wouldn't have been solder on the board, right? And it was one of those, our model is to not touch this data, but this customer will just get a board with parts in the bag at the end.
Right.
Which is not what this customer's expecting. And that's when we
Right.
kind of started realizing that just wasn't really going to work. That was the start of it, I guess. Because that was kind of early on. I think that was Steven was there when we saw that. Because I think Steven was actually the one who called me over. He's like, so none of these parts will go on the board. They'll just come off.
Yeah, and Misha would find some pleasure in this. There was actually a board working session about what we were going to do about the customer part orientation issue.
You say a board working session with the board of directors?
Yes.
I was on the board. I don't remember this.
You were part of it. No, actually, I don't know that you
I
engaged in
blocked
it. There was another board member that kept it going well into the night one night.
That's funny.
But yeah, that was...
There's another story. I can't say that. I can't tell the rest of that story on the podcast, but it led to order review.
Yeah.
Was the outcome.
But yeah, that was... Yeah, it was just our strategy is to not touch it, but customer will be angry. So, and that's also another thing. The customer can't be angry. So it's
Paradox.
two conflicting pillars. That was the two pillars of early macrofab, right? And
Yeah.
that broke it.
And there were lots of suggestions around, maybe we can use AI to solve this problem. Maybe we can do all this. And finally, we just ended up with, why don't we just review the boards and correct the mistakes?
Yeah.
That gets huge marks from our customers, by the way. And I've seen the tickets where we've saved a number of designs just because somebody checked it out and made sure that everything was right.
Yeah, it's once you're in there, you're providing a service, right? You look and you say, well, what more can we do in here, right? What more can we find? Can we provide more value in here? And there's always opportunities for it.
I bet most people who listen to the podcast probably don't realize that everything we're talking about right now, the low volume electronics production, that's probably only about 20% of our business, right? So much of where we've actually grown, and this has been a big journey in figuring out where the biggest problems are. It's actually with customers building in much higher volumes, right? And in fact, our biggest customer, I think we'll ship something close to 1 million units for them this year. And And this is counterintuitive, right? I think, I mean, I was there at the beginning, right? I may not have been at the office every day, but we started out enabling fast prototype production. So how do you go from that to customers that are building in very high volume? And this is the reason why we have new investors, and this is the reason why we keep raising money, because that's another counterintuitive thing. Why do manufacturing companies raise capital at all, right? Usually manufacturing companies, they get started and they need to get profitable and they grow out of their profits. We've raised, a fair bit of venture capital at this point. This last round was $42 million, um, and some really interesting investors that joined this round. But that takes our capital total to $82 million, which, if you do the math, our investors expect us to be a multi-billion-dollar business one day, right? Nobody invests, close to $100 million into a business without saying, "Look, this could be a really big thing." I think the thing we stumbled on over time is that the types of technology we wrote to automate a lot of the manufacturing processes is really compelling for people trying um, to solve a lot of big supply chain problems, right? The biggest thing that people come to us now for when we deal with companies at scale is, how do I take that initial design that I build with your prototype service? But let's say I love the way it works and I don't want to leave your platform and I want to keep building with Macrofab. Usually companies have to go to 3, maybe 4 factories in that journey, right? They're going to go find a larger manufacturer. They're going to find the larger manufacturer yet again at maybe 10 to 20,000 units of scale. And then when you get to millions, to find yet another manufacturer. What a lot of our customers are finding is that they can stay with us and stay in the same platform. And that junction, right, that point where you switch from one factory to another, it takes 4 to 6 months to go find a new manufacturer and kind of onboard into a new factory. We eliminate all of that lag, right? You can essentially stay with Macrofab for every part of your manufacturing process. So that's how we ended up scaling into this model where 80% of our business now comes from customers that do very, very large jobs. And now they're coming to us in some cases without even prototyping with us. Now they're coming to us saying, "Look, I got to get out of China, and I gotta find factory capacity either in US or in Canada or in Mexico." And that's what's driving, I would say, half of our pipeline are customers that are coming to us saying, "I need to be able to find kind of risk-free manufacturing outside of Asia, and in some cases move production out of China into something like Mexico, for example," right? So that's a lot of what we ended up doing, and now it's kind of an end-to-end service with the prototype at scale all the way up to high volume production, which I think certainly wasn't where Macrofab got started. That pretty far away from our original thesis.
I mean, originally, like, the platform wouldn't even quote anything over like 100 units. So yeah.
I was about to say, I remember it kind of being sold to me in that way. It sold to me as in like explained, but the difference between prototype and manufacturing run was on the order of 100 to 1,000 units, as opposed to 5 to 1 million.
And I know we had struggled with that over the years, trying to find that right combination of, feedback to the user. Eventually, I think we just said, look, you plug in whatever you want. If you like that price, if you're happy with it, we'll build it. You want 1 million units at that price? I don't care.
Funny enough, at one point we had different like production tiers, if you would call that. And we honestly actually went back to almost the original style, like what I called the UFO interface of quote of displaying the quote. Like you just type a number in and it'll give you what the number is.
Right. Right.
And now it has a nice fancy chart there now, and the UFO colors are gone.
I miss the alien.
I missed the UFO.
We literally, we called it the alien color scheme.
Yeah.
Miss that.
And this is how and the colors were picked because it's the most contrast, and so the least amount of people would be would have color blindness on that color scheme. That was the entire reasoning for it.
Yeah, that's one. I don't know. We're getting away from the depth of the conversation that Misha
Yeah,
just had us
I know.
on, and we're getting into something completely banal here.
Well, no,
But
the best thing is this is like the trajectory of like, because like Misha's like CEO and he's not supposed to get in the weeds, and I'm like the exact opposite of like I'm like the weed man.
yeah, well, the takeaway was the alien color scheme was over optimizing for a set of parameters that actually didn't matter. We wanted every colorblind person to be able to use it, it to have perfect. I can't remember what the ratio of contrast between every single color was, and you end up with this like neon festivity on your screen,
Yeah,
and everyone hates it.
yeah. No one liked it except like Church and I. I think we were the only ones that liked it.
But I think this kind of comes. We will bring this back around to the subject which Misha started us on. It's again, it's going back to what problem you're really trying to solve,
Yeah,
right? You get a solution in mind, you get all these parameters. I have to have cheap, I have to have fast, right? I have to have all these things because people are telling me that's what they want. But that's not actually what they're paying for, right? They're, to Demisha's point, the real problem here is people want to get a product to market. That is the thing that they want a solution for. It's, cheap prototypes, that's one person in that process from beginning to end, right? That engineer's desires to not spend more than 20 bucks, it may be in total conflict with the product owner's desire that they get this done yesterday, right? And so when you go back and you look at what the actual problem is someone's trying to solve, you start creating new solutions like a marketplace for manufacturing. You start saying, hey, I am going to take on a 1,000,000 unit order because we're here to help them get their product to market. And what's the best way for us to do that?
And I still think it's counterintuitive to a lot of people because, look, we started out selling to engineers and still do. That's still when I say 20% of our business, that makes it sound like it's an unimportant part of the business. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Our biggest deals start out with engineers discovering our service and then bringing us in and saying, hey, I found this thing. It doesn't work at all like what you would expect, but I think it's what we need. So actually, our biggest deals started out as engineering driven deals. Those engineers are the first ones to kind of get infected with the idea. But I think one of the biggest things that is still endemic to the way that the manufacturing industry works is it's all based on monolithic idea of your factory and where your stuff gets built. And we get into these debates. Believe it or not, we argue with customers. That happens. So we'll talk to traditional supply chain people, and they'll say, "Look, I'm going to choose one factory, and that factory is going to be the factory where I work. The rest of the time, I know how to choose the perfect factory." And our answer to them is, that's not the way the most resilient systems out there work. For example, in the cloud world, you don't deal with a single data center anymore. You don't deal with a single server anymore. You deal with these distributed fabrics that give you access to a lot of capacity. So we started doing that with manufacturing. That's where, and now we're starting to win over customers that actually want that from day one. They're real. The pandemic was actually kind of a big journey. There've been a lot of people that probably 2 years ago would have told us no, now coming back to us and saying, I think I get it. None of this stuff is stable. And I think about my Chinese suppliers, and the Chinese government can just turn off not just the factory, they can turn off the entire city of Shenzhen, and all of a sudden nothing's getting built anymore. I need to actually build real redundancy and resiliency into what I'm doing, and all of a sudden, this idea of a fabric of factories that all work together to give you the product you need doesn't sound crazy anymore. It actually sounds like the way it should work. So I think over time we're going to see people kind of rewire their ideas of how manufacturing should really operate. And that's what I think is happening. There's still new companies being born with different business models funded by venture capital dollars that still may fail, or they may work. I don't know. I think manufacturing is going to look very different 10 years from now.
which is a really good segue into a question I was going to ask is, so what's the biggest challenge MacFab's going to face the next 5 years? Or 10 years, I guess.
I would imagine Church has a different answer than I do.
Well, you start with yours.
I'll put you on the spot.
Um, so I'm not going to give you one. I'm going to give you the twofold challenge. I think in a lot of ways, because we built a new model for how to build products, right? The whole idea is, look, you start in a digital environment, you start on our platform, and then you stay on our platform as we build in higher volumes. And you don't have to be in multiple factories, but you can be. And your factories are portable, and we can put you into multiple factories at the same time or move you if you're so inclined, right? Um, I think that's a pretty radical idea. We have more, I mean, we're talking about companies paying millions of dollars to do this now. But at the end of the day, that's not the way manufacturing works. So I think educating the market is probably my biggest concern. If we don't convince people that that's the way it should work, we're not going to reach that point where I hate using cliches, but like crossing the chasm is a thing, right? Like we're still dealing primarily with early adopters. So we have to go tell that story. We got to convince people that it's the right way to go build product, which deals with the second challenge of we cannot fuck it up. Like that is very important, right? Like this stuff has to work, right? Like this isn't something where, and you know, I kind of marvel at some of the naive stuff we were able to do in a software world. I mean, Google had Gmail with a beta tag in it breaking half the time for 4 years, right? I mean, it was a long running joke about whether Gmail was ever going to go to production. That doesn't really work in manufacturing. So we got to both build a new model that gets people something they don't have yet, but also be best in class at building stuff and recognize that a lot of the stuff that we build is mission critical, and there's really not a lot of margin for error. For some of our customers, they literally tell us, look, the number of units that can have fail in a field is zero. That is what you're building, right? So that's a tough thing to do, but it's also a lot of fun, I would say.
So I think I'm actually not going to have a different answer. I'm just going to be more focused in one area. I may state it differently. Uh, it's pretty straightforward from my perspective, right? Everything we do is fairly complex, and I know Parker knows this inside and out. Our product team certainly knows this. Our operations teams know this. There's so many different. Every product is unique in its challenges and how we have to help that customer get it into manufacturing. I'm every single day I'm shown, well, we need to do this one special thing we never did before, and the process isn't really flexible enough for this, and the tool isn't flexible enough, and how do we, work around this? How do we adapt the system quickly to do it? So I think the biggest challenge facing us in the near term here is the ability to actually keep up and build a resilient system around all the complexity that our customers are bringing to us. And it's it's Misha's not fuck up in a completely different way, not fuck up at scale, right? Because we can get that right for the customers we are at a current level, but when you're doubling that and you're tripling that, and the number of problems you're having to deal with on a given day is increasing, multiplying like that. I think that's the real big challenge. And for us as a business, we have to be plotting that course now, right? We have to be learning what we're learning today, and then out there actually building for that future state. Even if we don't know where it's going to end up, we have to be building to that every day.
Yeah, it's the journey from you're gonna get alien colors for a PCB in the platform to this super flexible platform that can handle anything. That's gonna be the toughest thing, I think.
Yeah.
How do you handle? Because most CMs do 4 or 5 products. Steven, your place, how many products did y'all build?
We might be a little bit unique because our catalog was 55 products. We probably at any one point in time had 20 of those in production, and we had upwards of 15 to 20 clients that we were doing. So it was a lot of mix, but the majority of that wasn't over 100 to 300 units.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one thing is like, how do you do a CM that is seeing that many products in like 2 weeks? And that's actually
right.
we
And do them all correctly.
and do them
But
all
there are
correctly.
there are factories out there
weeks.
that are perfectly fit for that kind of volume, right? And that's the thing I keep learning about is just the diversity of just factory capacity, especially in US. There are a lot of factories out there, and that's when Chris said nobody wanted to give us money to build more factories, that was true, but also like there's a lot of factories out there. The world hardly needs any, for us to build any more of them. And people that really love building products. So, when we talk, because we consider factories to be our customers too. We literally have product managers for factories. We have a separate team that goes out there and works with factories. Their problems are fascinating too, because like the marginal customer in a factory is the hardest and most expensive one to source, right? Like you said, factories typically have, I think their bread and butter are 4 or 5 customers. They usually have about 20 or so. Well, they may need 22 in order to get to 90% utilization, but those are the hardest ones to sell. Like you gotta get them to fit into the smallest production slots. They can't be too big, they can't be too small. They got to be just right. That's a really hard customer to go find. So there's mismatches in this market all over the place.
And that's where marketplaces really do well, right? You got the Goldilocks problem. I need a flow of the right options so I can pick just the right one for today's problems, right? And I think that's why we've been able to be as successful as we have been, because we've been able to solve that Goldilocks problems for many of our factory customers.
And it's funny calling it a marketplace because it is, right. There's absolutely a marketplace mechanism there for matching up, like the catalog problem that Steven described. That's exactly what it does, right? We're matching the diversity of people's items in their catalog with the diversity of factories that we have in our portfolio. But usually marketplaces are essentially virtual enterprises, right? They don't have the physical plant. For a marketplace, we have some big facilities. Like I'm talking about facilities that we own, like the facility in Guadalajara is pretty big, and the one in Houston that we're building, that we're about to move into, is even larger. It used to be Foxconn, right? So we're literally taking over the Foxconn facility. So even though it's a marketplace, we still found that customers, you still got to be able to build product in house, and you still got to be able to build the fastest turn products are still built in house for Macrofab, and first articles are definitely built in our factory. So even though we build in very high volume in all sorts of factories in U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but our facility is gonna be pretty badass. It's the one we're moving into looks really nice. You guys gonna do like an open house episode where you walk around with the camera?
That's actually a good idea. Actually, this is a really good segue. Is was it May 4th is going to be an open house at Macrofab. We're going to have another engineering meetup. First one in like 6 years.
I was gonna say we haven't done one in years.
Yeah.
Wait. Are we gonna have we're gonna bring the meetup back?
Yes, May 4th.
Awesome.
So if you're in the Houston area or want to like fly and visit Houston, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could.
But there's a lot of
For the May 4th meetup.
For the May 4th meetup. Misha, not everyone will fly to like go eat places.
Well, if you're gonna fly to eat things,
Exactly.
Houston is a great place to do that.
Let me switch those words around. Not everyone flies to go eat at restaurants in
Yes.
places. Only Godzilla flies to eat places.
I don't think does Godzilla even fly though.
I fly into in places to eat at restaurants.
Given how far he can jump relative to me, I call that flying.
when you admit to that sentence, Chris, I thought you were calling Misha Godzilla.
Sure.
He can kind of do a good impression
True.
sometimes.
It's
Yeah.
still run its course.
Yeah. I'm now going to be expecting like the Monday morning meeting. Misha comes on and does the Godzilla roar.
Sounds like a challenge.
Can be done.
It can be done.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, I'm really excited that we're bringing the meetup back. I'm looking forward to it. I used to love them, right? You know, it was great that we had that one area that was big enough to fit everybody, and then we filled it up with desks and then with equipment and.
Now it's storage and quality assurance right now.
Is there a theme other than open house for the meetup? Is there a topic?
We don't have one yet. We're gonna. I think marketing is still trying to figure out what we're actually going to be doing. I think we're going to have talks. No. Chris was laughing there. They told me to talk about this, so it's definitely happening.
Okay. So I'm concerned here, right? It sounds like two rules are being broken, right? One is marketing was never allowed to tell you what to do on this podcast, and two was the engineering meetup was for by engineers for engineers.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we
I
did
don't
have
think
marketing
marketing tells you what to do, right? They advise softly.
They don't tell me what to do.
They didn't tell you.
Actually, if
about that.
anything, I ask them for advice all the time.
As if you would actually listen.
I guess, but I do ask them for advice all the time, especially for this podcast. But no, they're setting up the meetup. I think we're going to do talks. I don't know exactly. Like, we don't know if we want to do like a live podcast or anything like that. We don't know yet. We're still trying to work out like what we actually want to do. I think like we just do it how we used to do it. Like, get a bunch of beer, pizza, and get a couple of people to talk about stuff. Yeah.
That always worked for me. I liked it.
Yeah, me too.
And there was good turnout.
Yeah.
And now it's a bigger building, so we can have more people.
I know. We got to break our last record. I think what was our biggest? We had about 100 people once, right?
Yeah, it was. I think we got up to like 990 something at one of the last ones, and then yeah, we ended up having to use that entire like building for building stuff, and that just kind of went away.
Right.
So, y'all have any other closing comments?
I have a question for you guys. So I'm in a lot of customer meetings, and a lot of times there are engineers in customer meetings, but a lot of times I meet with people that are in the supply chain world. So in those conversations, everybody is obsessed about reshoring these days, and I don't know. Maybe not everybody is doing it, but they're certainly talking about it. And there's a fair number of companies that are pulling the trigger and actually making. I mean, even Apple, right? Like we've seen Apple start to yank jobs out of China and moving them to. Apple's not is not moving to U.S. and Mexico, obviously, but they're going to Vietnam and India and Malaysia and places like that. But you guys stay in touch with a lot of engineers. Is reshoring and decoupling from China a big topic, or is this just a thing that CNBC talks about and mostly a supply chain topic?
It's something that this is just what I do. I do that same. I personally do it, I guess. For supply, I pretty much anything with supply chain. If someone has supply chain stuff, that's where they talk about it. I don't think they initially come out and there's other external factors, right, that push them to do that. Like, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just about to say, I would say the lion's share, if not almost 100% of all experience I have with hearing people talk about this particular topic comes from Parker and Parker alone. Parker's very adamant about this, and to be entirely frank, I I've heard very little from other engineers about just the I don't know, the fervor with
Yeah.
bringing manufacturing back here.
Yeah, it's like for me at least, it's like I'm even looking at like what my country of origin of parts are. I know a lot of engineers don't really seem to care about that. I think they should care, and mainly for like I want to be able to build if I'm building a product, I want to be able to keep building the product, right? I don't want to have supply chain problems. I guess that's more of a procurement thing than an engineering thing, though.
But I mean, it blows back on engineers as well, right? I mean, I don't know about the reshoring topic, but like when they were and still are, right? Like when there's availability problems, right? I mean, we work with a whole lot of companies where some portion of their BOM is unobtainable. So who gets to deal with that nightmare? It's not the supply chain people. They just go back to engineering and say, hey, give me subs, right? Like, tell me which other, I don't care where you, how you redesign it, but can you, Parker, you and I were talking about how Tesla was able to ship cars in the same quarter that Ford and a bunch of others ended up missing their delivery targets. They rewrote their firmware for different components that were available, right? So, like, it absolutely affects engineers when there's supply chain shocks, right? So, but I do think it's interesting that, and Stephen, I agree with you. Like, I do see the supply chain people really thinking about it now, where maybe they weren't before. But I'm not sure if the engineers are all that engaged. I think they're just kind of going with what the corporate side's telling them, which is, you say reshoring is important now. That's great. That has nothing to do with the design. So let me know when I need to care about it.
Yeah, it's probably because I see it all the time with our customers, of them having to redesign their boards. But yeah, you're right. It's not really the engineers driving that, because it's not at most companies. It's not the engineer that is doing procurement or making sure you can get the parts. They go, oh, this part does the function I need and within the parameters I need, and so they select it. They don't, because they've historically not had to worry about that, but now I'm the kind of engineer that I don't like doing things twice, and so I make sure I don't have to get substitutes, because or having to redesign a board for that. But I guess some engineers might see that as like job security.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that with a bunch of our. I mean, like, we've never sold. Like on a platform, we'll get a bunch of orders from Germany. For some reason, Australia. I don't know why we have so many Australian customers on the platform. Maybe the contract manufacturing industry in Australia is especially awful, because that's really far away. Like ordering from Macrofab when you're in Australia just seems like a long way to source your parts, your assemblies, right? But we're all of a sudden dealing with a bunch of European customers, and I ask them, why now? Like, we've never talked to Europeans before, and they said they had a bunch of their North American customers that said, get out of China. I even talked to a Taiwanese ODM, and they were told by their customers, get out of China, which is pretty wild. Like, you wouldn't think a Taiwanese ODM would start looking for North American factory capacity, but they are. They're out there now searching for how to, and, this is like business continuity, right? Like, how do you, like, if something happens with Taiwan and China, you can't just have a contract with somebody that says, I will start building in US or Mexico. That's not how any of this works. Like, you can't go from cold start to production. So there's a bunch of people now thinking about this stuff. So I wonder if that's going to be a bigger topic.
It will be a bigger topic. It just, I don't know if engineers will care.
Yeah,
I care. I care a lot about it. But it's always been a big stickler for me, at least. And I try to use this podcast to push that, I guess.
Yeah, we may end up starting another podcast about this topic. So some of this is driven by our marketing team. They were like, look, Chris Church is going to get a podcast, and Misha's going to have a podcast, and then we decided, like, look, that's just insane. First of all, nobody wants to hear us talk that much. But I do think, the supply chain topics we're talking about, I think engineers sometimes care about it and sometimes don't. So like, I wouldn't want to come into the macrofab engineering podcast and make it a reshoring podcast. That would probably, I think a lot of people would get bored really quickly. But so we might end up starting a separate vehicle for that. And I think I already have the first guest for it identified. It's a pretty interesting guy. He was, do you guys know how like US has been taking it to Huawei pretty hard and just, I mean, there's just been a lot of tension between US and Huawei. Like we restricted their ability to sell in US, and then we got a bunch of other countries to restrict their ability to sell in other countries. I think like the daughter of their CFO got arrested in Canada at one point. It's been like a escalation after escalation. The latest one has been, I think Huawei is now getting hit with export control. So like they're not going to be able to buy all the chips they want to buy manufactured in US, for example. So it all started somewhere. So I found this guy who kind of championed this work for the National Security Council. So he'll be the first guy that we'll probably have on our. So I don't know how many episodes we're going to do. I definitely want to hear from this guy because, and when you think about it, this is now a policy that has survived 2 different presidents. Like this guy worked in the Trump administration. The Biden policy, I think, is even more hardcore. So this isn't like somebody's political view. I think this has become an American policy all of a sudden. So I'm super interested to hear how he thinks about it, because like at the NSC, I think he had a portfolio of figure out which companies are maybe a threat to national security, and I guess Huawei was definitely on the list, and TikTok was the other one, right? So that's what they went after. But I think we'll see more of that. Like I would not be surprised if things got hot enough to where more companies got blacklisted, and at some point the supply chains didn't completely come apart, but let's say that there were 2 different spheres, and it maybe is not the best idea to dip into those spheres equally for some. That's right. So I do think it'll affect engineers eventually. So I think this guy will be an interesting guest. I think he'll be somebody that'll give us a perspective on like when we start to blacklist a company like Huawei. How does that start exactly? Like, is there a playbook for doing that? And are we going to do more of that in the future? Right? I mean, are there going to be more companies under sanctions? And like Huawei doesn't affect us at all, right? Like we don't buy anything from Huawei. We're not a telecommunications company. But if component suppliers get on the wrong side of the government, it will absolutely affect a bunch of products. So stay tuned. We'll announce it here. So when we're doing the first episode. But I think we're gonna do at least one of them because that one sounds interesting.
Yeah. When you do that podcast, or actually before, so we can let our listeners know. You know what? Funny you say that they might not be interested. That when we talk about the supply chain stuff, that those are some of our most downloaded episodes. It might also just be because like other people besides engineers are downloading it, and that might be a bigger market.
Look, yeah, but we don't have like any particular plan, so like we can certainly just invite them on this podcast, right? Like if we think.
No, I mean, it sounds like you want to run that interview. So
no. Look, I'll join. I think he and I both come from a cybersecurity background, so we got plenty to talk about. I don't think he knows I'm not a Trump voter. So
we can do, Misha, is
you can add some spice to it.
What we can do, Misha, is we can write a custom intro that you can read.
Can it be written by ChatGPT in a Westworld style?
Sure.
That's what I want.
Any more closing comments?
No, I think we'll come up with more topics. And look, we got a Slack channel, so we can socialize them and see how people feel about them. But I do think that, like, I don't know, the supply chain stuff seems to have exited the realm of topics nobody cares about, and all of a sudden, like, I mean, Jack White, like, he had a tour called Supply Chain Issues. So all of a sudden, this stuff is like top of mind for a bunch of people. So I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to I think this topic is going to keep evolving. So we're going to keep. I think we should talk about the CHIPS Act at some point, right? And we have a couple of people on the board that I think would be really interesting. That would have an interesting perspective on this. One guy used to work at TTI for 17 years. The other guy is at Silicon Labs, so he spends a lot of time in Taiwan, and produces through some of the largest fabs out there. So, like when you ask me about the CHIPS Act, I have some opinions. Chris has some opinions, but I mean those guys, like it definitely affects them. So
They
I
can
think that's
totally fill an hours of podcasts of content then.
I mean, in no small part because like nobody knows yet. Like people don't realize the CHIPS Act is just so big. I think I'm just going from memory, but it's a $47 billion bill just for fabs, right? Just to build fabs in North America. But the entirety of the package is like $217 billion. So then the question is, well, what's the other $150 billion used for? And the answer is they don't know exactly. It's such a big appropriation. I asked the guy about it. I was like, hey, I don't think it affects Macrofab, but also like I'm interested, but I'm not trying to get any of the money. But I was like, but if I was to get some of the money, how would I get it? And he was like, you hire a lobbyist and you start going to meetings because the $150 billion hasn't exactly been spent yet. And it will be a multi-year process just to figure out how to spend it. It'll be an evolving thing. Nobody knows how that much money gets spent and what kind of impact it makes, So yeah, more stuff to talk about.
I guess that we can finally close on this podcast then.
We can close it out.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much
Sure.
for coming on, Chris and Misha. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Of course, always glad to be here when you guys want to.
I was gonna come once, but now you want to come back. Don't say you didn't ask for this.
I like having y'all on the podcast. That's why I was
Yeah,
like,
this
when I
is
was
great.
looking up earlier today and when the last time you were on, I'm like, that's not right. Y'all have been on sooner than that. Nope. It's been 5 years, Misha.
We try to give engineers some space, not to get too weird in here,
It's already weird. If anything, this might be the most normal podcast we have in a while. So that was the Macrofab Engineering Podcast. We're your hosts, Parker Dillman.
And Stephen Craig,
Later, everyone.
take it easy.
Cheers.
Thank you, yes, you, our listener, for downloading our podcast. If you have a cool idea, project, or topic, or you want to see more of Misha and Chris, let Steven and I know. Tweet us at Macrofab, at Longhorn Engineer, or at AnalogENG, or email us at podcast@macrofab.com. Also, check out our Slack channel. You can find it at macrofab.com/
I think we lost you again, Parker.
Yeah, you just went blank on us.
Yeah, that
You
last sentence chopped off.
Flashed and it killed it.
Yep,
Macrofab.com/ boom.
that's it. Nope. Yep, maybe.
Can you hear this?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not even going to try to fix this.
Did you transpose it and it started working?
Oh, no, this is...
Yeah, now
Wait.
it sounds like it's working
Yeah,
again.
yeah. I think
The
you're
other
back on
one's
the other
back on.
mic.
Is this working?
Yes.
What kind of mic is that? Is that a Shure?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a SM7.
SM7.
That's a nice looking mic.
We should
You
get
look
you one of these. We actually should get both of y'all one of these.
Dollar Behringer knockoff.
No, we should get y'all a little interface and a nice little SM7B because they're
These are kind of the de facto speaking mic.
yeah.
Because USB mics are not cool.
It's more of they don't pick up room noise. It's like the sphere is like this big.
Oh, guys, I apologize. I gotta go. The dog
Alright,
is
Chris.
losing her
Yeah,
mind
No,
outside
yeah,
the door.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you
Just
so much,
Just
Chris.
leave.
Appreciate you
Just
spending the time.
close your camera and mute yourself because I'm still waiting for you to upload.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it on.
Just
then.
leave it on. Yeah, you don't have
Okay.
to do anything.
Oh, I guess I should hang out then, because I was gonna turn off my laptop.
That would be bad.
Okay.
We had a guest do that once, and that was a nightmare to get all the audio.
How can I tell if it's uploading yet? It doesn't say anything.
Let's see.
There's usually a little bar. Mine already finished, I think.
Yeah, I'm actually just checking. Yeah, Steven's, yours is done. I'm actually gonna download what I can.
Hey Parker, those little wire things I designed, they work awesome.
Oh, the little zip tie clips.
The little cable management stuff.
Okay, so I got all the audio. I'm just gonna check everything. And